Good evening. Welcome to everyone wherever you are. And thank you very much for joining this event in association with our exciting exhibition Samurai at the British Museum. We are very pleased to share it with you. I'm joined tonight by project curator on the exhibition, Joe Nickols. We're going to give a resume of the exhibition, talking about the scope, the themes, and some of the highlights. We'll divide it between the two of us and allow time at the end for some brief questions. So please put your questions directly into the Q&A function on Zoom. The word samurai is known around the world and conjures up an image of a formidable warrior, holding a sword, a male warrior, I should say, holding a sword and possessed of ideals of courage, honor, self-sacrifice, and loyalty. Yet there is little understanding of the historical reality of the people we call samurai, the wide variety of roles they played across the centuries, and the many ways they represented themselves and were depicted by others, even long after they had disappeared. This is the first exhibition to examine critically the stereotype by exploring the many aspects of the lived reality and of the history of representation. It's divided into three sections, and we have three images here as placeholders for those: the period of the warrior, a long period of peace, and then the afterlife of the samurai. And we'll take you through those three sections. There are 7 key messages for the exhibition, which I'll run through quickly so that you can understand what we're trying to do. A modern idea of the samurai has its origins in reality, as a distinct warrior class gained political dominance during the 1180s, and we'll see how that class developed. Secondly, the development of the samurai and their image emerged from the interaction between Japan and the rest of the world, and this is an important point that recurs throughout the exhibition. Throughout history, samurai engaged extensively in cultural activities as consumers, patrons, writers, scholars, poets, and painters. And this was of an equal importance to the fighting. Then from 1615 to the 1860s, there was a long period of peace when samurai were established as a social class, half of which were women. During this period, samurai men served as government administrators and women ran the households. In the 1890s, after the status of samurai had been abolished, a myth developed known as Bushido, or the way of the warrior. And this was co-opted during Japan's period of colonial expansion and military aggression, leading up to defeat in 1945. And lastly, since the Second World War, the ideal of the samurai has been repurposed in Japan to promote new values and has been popularized worldwide as an image embodying a range of abstract qualities. We'll introduce some images of the exhibition so you get an idea of the atmosphere and the design. And we start with this splendid suit of armor that you just saw in the title slide, which we acquired for the museum at the beginning of last year. It's a high status suit, probably for a feudal lord, with heirloom elements that have been combined, given new lacing, new silk, this ostentatious standard behind it. And this is the image of the samurai warrior that everybody expects. I'm going to hand over to Joe now to take you through some of that early history and that story of the samurai as warriors.
Thank you, Rosina. As Rosina has said, this exhibition is about confronting stereotypes about the samurai. And part of that is to establish where they came from, because as Rosina said again, we imagine them as wielding swords when they actually emerged as mounted archers, firing arrows off horseback. And you can see the type of armor that they would have worn on the left here. So what we want to show in this first section is how they evolved. The samurai were not just influenced by aspects of world and international diplomacy, but also from the different times that they existed in. Samurai existed for centuries, and they changed and evolved to confront the different experiences that were occurring. So as you can see in the armor on the left, you have these large shoulder guards that acted as shields. You have this rigid, boxy tassets or leg guards that come down at the base. And you have these extra bits of armor that are designed to protect the underarms when you are reaching up to fire your bow and arrow. As you can see on this slide, we've also got examples of the different types of quivers that they would have used. You have the Ibira quiver on the left, which is open, and the Utsubo quiver, which is closed. And this development in quiver design developed due to the environment that the samurai existed in. Japan is incredibly humid. And so the bamboo of the arrow would actually warp in the weather. So it was important to develop a different type of quiver to store these arrows in, hence the utsubo. The one we have here is quite a showstopper. It's decorated with mother of pearl and looks just incredible. And you can see below a similar striking design of dragonflies on this saddle set. And the dragonfly is an emblem of the samurai, as the dragonfly always goes directly towards its prey. On this screen in the center, you can see a different type of armor. You might notice compared to the armor on the left that it is slightly more, it's got more tassets and at the bottom for the leg guards, which is designed to allow for more movement and mobility. And the shoulder guards have shrunk slightly. And this alludes to the development of warfare that happened later on as the samurai went back to war after the fall of the first shogunate. And this was when infantry battle, or infantry combat, became much more predominant in the style of combat that the samurai participated in. So what we're trying to illustrate is that the samurai image develops because of the environment within which they exist in. On the left, you see how they emerged, and on the right, you see how they grew into a different type of warrior. And now I'm going to pass back to Rosina, who'll show you images of how the samurai participated in battle and how they represented themselves.
The creation of the image of the strong, valorous warrior was very important from early times in the medieval period. The image at the top of the screen here is from a hand scroll, a later copy of a hand scroll, because these had prestige for many centuries and were copied and transmitted. And we use it for two reasons. One is that it shows the brutality of battle, the reality of battle during this period. You can see a man being felled. The man on the rider on the white horse is falling backwards. He's been felled by an arrow. The man to the right on the black steed has a head on the end of his sword. There's a pile of bodies beneath a shield at the top of the painting with bloody footprints on it. This is an attack on the stockade at the left, and it makes the point that it's all about mounted archery to control the situation. But then the actual felling of your enemy happens with these long pole arms that you can see being held. There's one on the ground at the left where the figure has been decapitated. This is a very brutal reality to war. But the second reason we include this is these tales of heroism that were created during the medieval period, very often for people to make a statement about the service that they had given in battle. It's a transactional process to a large extent rather than being driven by abstract qualities of loyalty. They served on the battlefield and they expected to receive rewards of cash sometimes, but primarily of land. And so they had to document their achievements. But there's also an idealization of the samurai going on during this period. Tales are being told. The battles of the 1180s were key within Japanese history and key within the formation of the first warrior government. This was the result of a clan fight between two major clans, the Minamoto and the Taira. And these are the two groupings that are key to understanding medieval Japanese history. This is a battle screen, or a screen depicting a battle from 1184. Again, it's a later presentation of this. It has traction for centuries afterwards. And it shows the Minamoto launching a surprise attack from the mountains at the top of the screen onto the Taira fortress, and then the Taira flee into their boats on the water. And there's many famous scenes. There are labels on the screen so that people can understand exactly what they're looking at. And all of these tales were initially transmitted orally There were itinerant entertainers who went around singing songs, playing a lute to entertain gatherings of people in villages and towns. And gradually they were written down, codified, and they became known as the Tale of the Heike, which was first written in manuscript form in the 1300s. So these become the national legends, the founding stories of the warrior class. As I said in the messages, the importance of culture must never be forgotten. The samurai had proved themselves on the battlefield, but they had to transform that brute power into some kind of legitimate authority. There was an imperial court in Japan, and this continued to exist even after the samurai warriors took control, formed their own government. There was always a parallel structure, and the imperial court retained its authority. The emperor appointed the top samurai, who was known as the shogun. And the portrait on the left-hand side here was long thought to represent Minamoto no Yoritomo, who was the successful general, a member of this Minamoto clan, who established the first warrior government after success in battle in 1185. And he is presented as a courtier. He has the stiff, starched silk robes of a courtier. He holds a scepter of authority. He's in this interior space with a courtier's cap. So from these early periods, the warriors are not presenting themselves as fighting men. They are presenting themselves as courtiers to assert that legitimate power. And then there's another painting of a later shogun, a member of the Ashikaga shogunate. That's the second samurai government later in the Middle Ages. And this is an important cultural property that's had special permission to leave Japan and be displayed for a short period of time at the beginning of the exhibition. So I encourage you to go and see it soon. And then on the right of the screen, there are expressions of cultural or varieties of cultural engagement. This is a poetry gathering with tea preparation at the left-hand side, and it's beautifully played out by monkeys in this humorous rendering. But it's about the importance of tea ritual within samurai culture. And then beneath it is a no robe, very Buddhist-infused, stately, aristocratic form of theatre that the samurai wholeheartedly adopted. And ostentatious helmets, such as this fantastic winged goblin, a helmet in the form of a winged goblin, that allowed the samurai to express something of their personal taste and distinguish themselves on the battlefield. You wanted to be seen, you wanted to be identifiable to your troops. Over to Joe.
Oh, sorry. As the samurai developed and evolved during the 1500s, they encountered Europeans with the arrival of the Portuguese in 1543. Soon after that, there were embassies that began to leave Japan and go to Europe directly. This is an example. This case from the exhibition is an example of 3 different missions that occurred. On the left, you have the visit from Ito Mancho, who led the visit of 4 Christian samurai to Europe in 1585. This portrait here by Domenico Tintoretto was commissioned by the city-state of Venice. And beneath it is a broadsheet print that was made in Germany and shows the spread of information from this visit around Europe itself. The ruff around the neck shows how the samurai were envisioned when encountering European fashions. The large painting in the center is a papal commission commissioned by Pope Paul V of Hasakura Tsunenaga, who led a later embassy to Japan, not to Japan, from Japan, to the papacy to seek a trade agreement with the Pope to try and cut out the Portuguese middlemen from the trade from Japan. Here you can see the papal crest in the top left corner that was bestowed upon Hasakura Tsunenaga. It is of a Buddhist swastika bisected by arrows. And in the background, you can see a ship that above it has a vision of Christ and saints enthroned in the sky. So this painting is really significant as it shows the interest from the papacy into Japan, but also the effort that Japan was going to engage with international diplomacy. Once Hasakura Tsunenaga arrived back in Japan, returned to Japan in 1620, Christianity was beginning to be removed or conflict. There was a conflict against Christianity within Japan. And so the trade agreement was actually for naught. And next to that, we have the suit of armor that was given to James the Sixth and First of Scotland and England in 1615 by Tokugawa Hidetada. And so we can see here how the suit of armor is already becoming a symbol of Japan, and it is a way for Japan to show its military dominance to other nations. And this has been in the Tower of London for 400 years. But it wasn't just Japan going to Europe. We also have a case that explores Japan's invasion of Korea in the 1590s. So this international expansion that was led by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who is remembered as the second unifier of Japan. During the 1500s, this is when Japan was under a process of unification, first by Oda Nobunaga and then by Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who died in 1598. Toyotomi Hideyoshi was known for doing falconry hunts before major battles and displaying the fruits of these hunts. And so here we have a jimbaori, which is a surcoat that would sit on top of your armor that is decorated with feathers, pheasants and drakes feathers. So this is likely to have been made from the animals that were hunted. And so this is a literal embodiment that you could wear of your prowess in hunt and therefore convey your might in battle. The engagement with Korea allowed the Japanese to bring back Koreans to Japan as hostages, and many of them were potters, and it developed into a new style of ceramics that became very popular, known as rakuware, and is very popular within the tea ceremony. And this it has a big legacy and connection to these Korean invasions. At the top there, you can see a scroll of a Japanese excursion to hunt tigers on the Korean peninsula. Tigers don't exist in Japan, and so it was a huge move of dominance and power and sophistication to hunt tigers on the continent. But meanwhile, we also have the final battles of unification that lead to the Tokugawa supremacy and the enduring peace of the subsequent 250 years. And a lot of that is to do with the arrival of guns. In the painting at the bottom of this slide, you can see the siege of Osaka Castle. And this is where Tokugawa Ieyasu has a final stand against the descendant of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Hideyori. And you can see that there are guns in use there. And this wall gun, this very heavy weapon that is on display in the exhibition, has the Tokugawa crest on it. So without the use of guns, it may have been a very different battle, but a key weapon for unification. So I'm going to pass back to Rosina, who'll take you through the establishment of the Tokugawa period.
As Joe said, this final battle in 1615 leads into a period of peace, although nobody knew whether the peace was going to last. But one man, one general, Tokugawa Ieyasu, had already been appointed shogun by the emperor in 1603. He eliminates his rivals, and gradually a very stable society there is a stable society established, and it brings prosperity, economic expansion, booming population. This is known as the Edo period or the Tokugawa period, and it lasts through until the 1860s. And the exhibition design is trying to evoke something of the streetscape. There's a lot of movement, there's a huge amount of activity on the streets of Edo, today's Tokyo, which by 1800 is the largest city in the world. And we're trying to evoke the movements of the samurai men across Japan and through the streets of Edo. One of the ways that Tokugawa Ieyasu imposes his control, and his successors continue to impose control, is by commanding all of the lords, the regional lords, 260 regional lords, to come to Edo every other year and reside there for a year. And it's a form of military duty. You have to show up with all of your thousands of retainers. You reside in the city for a year, and then you're dismissed and you can return to your provinces. The wife of the lord and the heir will also have to remain in Edo to be kept as pawns, so that the lord will not foment a rebellion in the provinces. This was always the fear, that the shogunate could be toppled. So during this period, as I mentioned at the beginning, the samurai men are forming the government. They're serving as the ministers, the chancellor of the exchequer, they're the judges, the lawmakers, tax collectors. They're also doing practical work like policing or guard duty, firefighting. The samurai class is established. There's now a fixed social hierarchy, whereas during the previous centuries it had been rather fluid. There's now this fixed hierarchy promulgated by the Tokugawa shogunate. And the structure is that the samurai class are at the top. They're only about 10% of the population. Beneath them come the agricultural laborers who produce the food that keeps everyone alive, the artisans who produce useful objects, and then the merchants who are seen to profit off everybody else's activities. And this, like so much of Japanese statecraft and philosophy and culture, is taken from China. It's a Neo-Confucian structuring of society according to merit and contribution. In China, it's the scholar officials who are at the top. The samurai substitute themselves, and this is another reason why they have to be so active and so accomplished in culture to prove their worth and their moral legitimacy. On the left, we have another very special painting lent from Japan, from the National Museum of Japanese History, showing Tokugawa Ieyasu, but not just as a mortal. He is now immortalized, deified, as a Shinto deity, this native religion of Japan, which allows for humans to become divine forms after their death. His grandson puts him through this process, so to speak, and has him deified. And this is the visualization of a dream that his grandson Iemitsu, has of Tokugawa Ieyasu. So he's shown within a shrine structure, this canopied interior with a mat with a special edging to it, a Chinese gable above to show that this is a special space, and clouds at the bottom of the steps that lead you to this otherworldly realm. In the middle of the screen there, we have the normal appearance of a samurai during this period. This is the kind of business suit that they would have worn out and about. You've got a robe underneath, and then when you go out, you put on your starched hemped sleeveless jacket and trousers, and you have your family crest on the front of the chest. And this distinguishes you as a samurai, as does wearing two swords. So only the samurai are allowed to wear two swords. And then other images here show those duties. A fascinating print by Katsushika Hokusai showing the samurai as land surveyors with rulers and the theodolite measuring instrument. You have to know how much land you've got to predict what the yield is going to be, to do future planning for the economy for the populace. There's a hand scroll that shows samurai in their barracks when they have too much time on their hands. They're rather bored. They're chatting, smoking, drinking tea, waiting for a day when they're going to be given some orders. And then a book recording a devastating fire in the mid-1800s. And we also have firefighting costumes in the exhibition, and then a card game that samurai played when they were bored on guard duty. So there's all sorts of different roles that the men play. But as I mentioned, half of this class is women, and they had the responsibility of running the household, which could be a large operation with tens of people, hosting events, provisioning the household, educating the children, different requirements for boys and girls, perhaps organizing or arranging marriages of their children when they come of age. And we have objects in the exhibition that talk about or that speak to their lives, the way that they would have been transported. In the top left is a beautiful palanquin from the Victoria and Albert Museum, showing how a lady would have been, a high-class samurai lady would have been transported. The robe that she would have worn as a young unmarried woman with these long hanging sleeves. The firefighter's costume in the bottom left corner is for a woman. because in the women's quarters of Edo Castle, there were no men allowed, so the women had to deal with any fires themselves. And to be in charge of a company of these firefighters was a very onerous responsibility and had high status. So this is a ceremonial coat appropriate to a woman who had been put in that position, a dressing set for the toilette, and then an etiquette manual, a mirror, and an etiquette manual in the bottom of the screen. And above that is some items for children, because there were also samurai boys and girls, and a miniature version of that business suit we just saw, and then also a miniature version of the quiver with the auspicious image of a carp leaping up a waterfall to make it through the dragon gate at the top. Over to Joe.
As Rosina mentioned, Tokugawa Ieyasu unifies Japan and establishes the samurai as a class. And in 1615, he does an edict called the Buke Shohato. And within this, the first edict is that the samurai must continue with their military training and identifies archery, falconry, and swordsmanship as key elements of that. But within that first edict, there's also a demand to maintain fluency in Chinese literature. So the connection between warcraft or combat, military training, and culture is inseparable. They are considered to be essential skills for the samurai. So here, working from left to right, we have an archery set. This is a particularly exquisite example of an archery set. We believe it might have been commissioned for a coming of age ceremony for a member of the Tokugawa family. You can see the crest at various points on the set. In the middle, we have this stunning depiction of a falcon. When you come and visit the exhibition, you'll be able to see closely that the artist has really captured the character of the falcon. And it's likely to have been named. These falcons were very much revered as prized possessions and often given to the shogun as shows of allegiance. So they were very important animals. And then at the top there on the black background, we have this daisho, or this long and short sword, which are the two swords that the samurai were allowed to carry. The long sword is a katana, and the shorter sword is a wakizashi. And this is a sword stand, and is likely how the swords would have been placed within the home, never too far out of reach. And below that, we have some other elements, the tsuba, which are very popular collectibles, these sword guards, and they have lots of different designs on them. Some are inspired by religious ideas, such as this one, which is connected to the god Kangiten. Others are more whimsical and might just be in the shape of Mount Fuji. And you can see a display of 12 of them in the exhibition, as well as some ceremonial arrowheads. The actual action of archery was often performed at temples and at momentous events, and so it becomes part of many different ceremonies. So back to Rosina.
The culture remains tremendously important, as Joe mentioned, and we have some examples here of works that were created for samurai class, because there was a dedicated school of painters catering to them all of their needs for decoration in their interior spaces and in temples that were sponsored by samurai lords. And then examples of works that were created by samurai class men and women. On the left is an antiquarian style suit of armor. There's tremendous interest from the late 1700s onwards in Japan's past, in its history and its antiques. And this suit of armor emulates some of the features of the very earliest form that Joe described, the huge shoulder guards, a very large, chunky helmet, and particularly the plates on the chest that come from that form that was for mounted archery. And there's a lot of investigation of treasures in temples and shrines during this period, and books being published about this, as well as other intellectual pursuits like botanical studies, ornithological studies. In the middle at the top, there's a beautiful depiction of a cat underneath a peony bush by the wife of a daimyo lord. And this has been a nice result of research to find out her name. She was called Sadahime, and she was the younger sister of the senior counselor of the realm. So, a very high status lady who was sent off in a political marriage to the northern coast of Japan. And then an example of Kano school painting, this lion dog who is pushing its cub off a cliff to try to toughen it up. If the cub is tough enough, it will clamber up the cliff again. Beautiful painting by Hokusai of a young, attractive young man. And we have a section in the exhibition about the more effective pleasures of samurai life. The sex quarter that was created for the samurai in Edo for these men who were coming to Edo on temporary assignment, and then the erotic art that was created during the period that we know that was consumed by the samurai class, by the very highest levels, by the daimyo lords. There's a beautiful ink painting on a fan that also includes a Chinese poem that has some political protest encoded in the Chinese poetry, and an incense game to talk about some of the cultivated pursuits that people would have enjoyed in their leisure time hours.
But we are not just looking at the objects that the samurai used and commissioned and made. We are also looking at the image of the samurai. And so we have a big section that is dedicated to how these images permeated all of society in Japan during the Edo period. On the left here, we have examples of two extremes. One, a painting by Hokusai, which is incredibly elaborate. It has gold leaf in the painting. It's luxuriously pigmented, and it depicts Minamoto Tamatomo, an early samurai in exile. And below, you can see the same image that is a print design by Hokusai for a book that was mass produced. So you can, if you have the money, you can pay for unique, lavish goods that depict the images of the samurai, or you can buy a mass produced book, and both were done across society. Other famous stories include Shuten Doji, which is one of the elements that I think encapsulates many of the messages of the exhibition, which fuses reality with fantasy. So Minamoto no Daiko, a real historic samurai, is commissioned by the imperial court to go and slay an ogre who is abducting young maidens from Kyoto. So we can see this fusion happening in a hand scroll painting that was often included in bridal trousseaux for samurai women to instruct their children on samurai history and legends. Below that, there are four prints. Some depict famous samurai heroines like Tomoe Gozen, who's beheading her enemy here, or a famous general, Takeda Shingen, or a kabuki actor who is playing a fictional samurai, Sukeroku, with this incredible umbrella and the cherry blossom falling down behind it. And what stories of samurai legends would be complete without mentioning Chushingura, the tale of the loyal retainers, or as we know it in English language world, the tale of 47 Ronin. Due to time, we might have to move on to the bridge, but I would love to talk more about these stories because they are so entertaining. And the bridge is where we discuss the fall of the samurai. This is where, due to famine that's happening at the beginning of the 1800s, internal conflicts, but also a lot of external pressures, foreign pressures, that's Japan succumbs to internal conflict. On this slide, you can see how that evolved from this battle of frogs, which is a satirical print. It was actually banned. It was illegal to depict current events, and so often anthropomorphic characters were used to convey current events. And this depicts the Tokugawa doing a punitive expedition against the Choshu domain, who were rising up against the shogunate. But below that, you can see a print from later where the rebels fighting against the Tokugawa have tried to siege against Kumamoto Castle, and then the Imperial army here seen in their livery are fighting against the more traditional samurai. And this isn't the case. Both sides used Western weapons and armors and new technology in their battle, but this depiction of modernity versus tradition was extremely exciting for the Japanese populace who were buying these prints. And then there are other events that happen that cause great conflict within Japan and connections with international tensions, such as the killing of the British merchant Charles Lennox Richardson, who was struck down by the Satsuma samurai on procession. And that led to a small war between Britain and the Satsuma domain. And you can see a picture of the envoys who were sent to negotiate the settlement of that conflict there.
So section 3 takes up the afterlife of the samurai. Society is reorganized in 1869. A new government has come in after the samurai government collapses in the face of this Western pressure. New government in 1868. In 1869, they reorganized society. It's no longer felt to be suitable to the modern era to have this hereditary caste or the hereditary nature of society. Everybody is flattened as commoners with a residual aristocracy, which quickly loses any economic or social advantages. And at this point, the samurai becomes pure fiction. It's taken up by the West, perhaps earlier than it is recovered in Japan. For the first 20 years of this new era, even for 25, 30 years, there's very little interest in the samurai. They're seen as feudal relics. They had been resented by the 90% of the population that supported them, and society was keen to move on. In the wars that Japan fought in the 1890s, in 1894 against China, and then in 1904 against Russia, it was very much the Western soldier that was taken as the model with the uniform and a saber-type sword, and we examine some of this in the exhibition. But as I said, meanwhile, the Westerners are interested in this medieval fantasy of the knight, the valorous knight, the samurai. And we have at the bottom left here an suit of armor that was owned by a British architect and on display in his armory with other medieval European armors in London. And in the center of the screen is a painting that an Italian aristocrat, Count Henry of Bourbon, Borborone Parma, had painted while he was visiting Japan in 1887. And then gradually towards the end of the century, there's a reconsideration of the samurai image as a national figure. The print on the right shows Minamoto no Tametomo, that figure that Joe just described with regard to the Hokusai painting and the Hokusai book. And then in the early 20th century, this idea of there being a way of the warrior is created, propagated by various thinkers in Japan, and taken up enthusiastically in the West as a way of explaining this concept Bushido, as you can see on the screen there, a way of explaining Japan's military successes. It's the first Asian nation that is victorious over a Western nation, over Russia in 1905. And then the samurai image is taken up to a certain extent within Japan. We see it on this porcelain plate here that's a naval commemorative plate. But it does seem that it's more popular outside Japan than it is within Japan. And we talk about the use of this samurai image during the period of militarism and colonial expansion, but it's taken up more by the Allies and by the Axis powers. At the top left here is a poster by Gino Boccasile, the Italian artist, celebrating Japan's victories over the destruction of Allied battleships, because Japan has signed the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy, and they use the samurai image positively. Meanwhile, the Allies, and here this is an image for the propaganda film Know Your Enemy Japan, directed by Frank Capra, the Allies are using the samurai image very negatively. So we're trying to suggest that it can be pulled in both directions. Finally, Japan is defeated in 1945, and the samurai sword that has been used by all of the soldiers and the naval officers becomes a symbol of defeat, and there are tens of thousands of swords surrendered, which now are distributed across the world. And we have a sword in the exhibition and a photograph of it being surrendered here in Malaya in February 1946. And this is a very dark period of history, dark uses of the samurai image. So we wanted to take a moment to reflect on how some of the combatants on both sides of that conflict responded by making art in the years after the war. And in the middle, we have Shinkichi Tajiri, who was a Japanese American who fought with the US Army in very intense battle zones in Italy, was wounded and thus survived. And after the war, he moved to Europe, having suffered racism in America, and was creating these sculptures which he sees as peacekeepers. He calls them sentinel or ronin, the masterless samurai. And then the print and the ceramic sculpture on the right-hand side of the screen are by two Japanese men who served in the Japanese forces, and after the war reflected on the experiences that they had had and how they felt the tremendous weight of having survived, the comrades that they had lost, and the responsibility of that, and the survival, the life that was so precious to them.
And then this brings us into the post-war. And for a while, samurai imagery was banned under the American occupation that had a ban on militarist imagery. And then with the advent of films by Akira Kurosawa, there was a resurgence of interest in the samurai and a reimagining of their presence within everyday life. The samurai has been used to represent Japan, and it has been adopted as the name of the of the Japan football team as Samurai Blue. And this shirt that's second from the left on the top row, that's actually inspired by katanas. So this design on the side is meant to look like blades of weapons. And to the left of that, you can see a photograph of Yukio Mishima, the novelist and radical who tried to have a rebellion and call back to the legendary heroics and romanticized image of the samurai, took over a military base before performing ritual suicide after the failure of that. To the right of the Samurai Blue shirt, we have a limited edition, a special edition figurine that you can assemble yourself. It is a Gundam figure, which is a very famous franchise in Japan. And this is a limited edition for Tokugawa Ieyasu. So this is how they reimagine him within a popular franchise. And to the right of that, we have Nobunaga's Ambition. This is a video game that established itself in the 1980s and is still going today. It's the longest running samurai video game in the world. And Nobunaga's Ambition Awakening, I believe, was released in 2020. So it's still very popular within Japan. So that's really how Japan has been using the image. And below is how the samurai image has been spreading across the world through contemporary art, through such as this image of footballers that was actually adopted by FIFA for the 2006 World Cup. We have figurines of different franchises, Gintama, a famous anime and manga series, and then a woodblock print that's designed to combine Star Wars in the guise of a Japanese samurai print. And just before we close, I want to talk about three works that are new commissions for the exhibition. Two are artworks by the artist Noguchi Tetsuya, who's a Japanese-based artist who reimagines nameless historic samurai within a modern context. There's a sort of anachronism that's being used here in the guise of a phone or a rubber duck. So when we went and met with Noguchi Tetsuya in Japan, he said how he found the phone screen reflecting onto the faces of the youths leaving the subway to be very romantic, that idea of always being connected. And he really sees that the emotions of the samurai and the identity of the samurai as being able to transcend time. We are all in a very similar experience with being nameless people in the world of bureaucracy. And that's what the samurai often had to contend with during the Edo period. And then on the right here, we have a dress that was made especially for the exhibition by Lanvin. Rosina and I had meetings with the creative director, Peter Copping, who uh, we talked a lot about softening the samurai. Often, when the samurai inspires fashion, it's very hard, it's based around armor. Whereas here, even at first glance, you may think it's designed around armor, but if you look very closely, you can see that the embroidery is actually made up of paper clips to reference the bureaucratic nature of the samurai. So it's really exciting to have three works that have never been seen before and take the interpretations of samurai in different directions. At the beginning, I said that the samurai arrived as mounted archers, but when you leave the exhibition, you'll see that they're now mounted on rubber ducks, which is actually the best-selling object in the British Museum. So there's a little connection to us as an institution within the exhibition as well. I'm going to pass back to Rosina, who I think will now chair some questions.
Thank you very much. Yes, that brings the summary of the exhibition to a close. We're going to take some questions. I wanted to advertise as well, or to mention as well, that Joe's video about playing video games, samurai-themed video games, and commenting on them went live today. So I do encourage you to watch that. There's also a Curator's Corner that Joe did about the evolution of the sword, sort of technological and the form, evolution of the form of the sword. And you can see on the screen there a book that has been that we have written, myself and Professor Oleg Benesh from the University of York, who's been my research partner on this project over the past couple of years, which is a continuous narrative. It's not a catalogue, it's a book in 3 parts that will give you a lot more information on the themes of the exhibition. We have some questions here. I think I'm going to field the first one to Joe. It's about the armor and the structure of the armor. Was the armor hard to move in? Were there any innovations in samurai armor as a result of foreign influences, such as the Mongol invasions or the introduction of firearms?
Great question. Yes, to all of those elements, really. The armor was designed to be functional for the type of combat that they were engaging in. And you can see from the oyoroi that I presented at the beginning, when the samurai are mounted archers, they have these extra elements to accommodate for mounted archery. And then when they enter into infantry combat, there's the development of tassets that are designed to make the armor more flexible and easier to maneuver in on foot, as well as the shrinking of the shoulder guards to allow for more mobility when using infantry weapons. And there's a lot of development after the Mongol invasion. It was a type of combat that the Japanese hadn't seen before, those early warriors. And so there really was this this innovation as the Japanese samurai continued to experience new events. And then in the armor that you see at the beginning of the exhibition, I don't know if you can remember, it has this metal cuirass, and that's designed to be bulletproof. That version in particular is really interesting as it's designed to resemble the cuirass of a Portuguese musketeer. So not only is it responding to the international developments of ballistic firearms coming to Japan, but also the international influences of the type of people who are bringing it. So there's a lot of development from international occurrences. And I would also say as well, just the armor that I showed you, the Haramaki armor, is designed to be put on with attendants. And as there were more soldiers fighting during the Warring States period, the 1400s, 1500s, and particularly lower rank people, a different type of armor developed, which you could put on by yourself. It opens on a hinge at the side. So for the different ranks of soldiers as well, there are different developments in armor going on simultaneously.
Second question is about the depictions of samurai. I'll try to deal with these quickly. How do the depiction of samurai by samurai themselves match or differ from depictions from other depictions? I think it's It depends, or there's a shift according to period. We were talking about the depictions by the samurai class or commissioned by the samurai class of themselves in the medieval period, where they want to present as courtiers, or there are these valorous depictions of samurai in battle, the tales that are being told from the very early periods. And that doesn't happen so much. The early scrolls are copied in the later period after 1615. But the types of imagery, the types of representation of samurai that we focus on in section 2 are very much within popular culture. So it's a different set of people who are producing them. They're mass media. There's this huge publishing industry that develops because of the burgeoning economy, the booming economy. As I said, Edo is the world's largest city by population, 1 million people by 1800. It's eclipsed by Paris, I think, soon afterwards, but for a while it's the largest. And there's also substantial publishing in Nagoya. So there's lots of books published about samurai tales, sheet prints. This is linked to the kabuki theater as well, the prints that Joe showed of actors on stage in samurai roles. So I think there's a shift in who's consuming those images, whether they are unique, expensive paintings in the medieval period or mass-produced images in the Edo period. There's a question about Ashikage Yoshiteru. The special pieces that have come from the National Museum of Japanese History are coming off display early March. I don't know if Joe can remember which date they're being rotated,
Yes, they are being rotated on the 2nd of March. So come before the 2nd of March if you want to see those objects.
There's a lot of pieces from the British Museum collection in the exhibition. It's about 75%, and we will be replacing those loan objects with other wonderful works from the British Museum collection. And Japanese art is by its nature light sensitive. I mean, certainly all of the paintings, the prints, a lot of the textile, the lacquer. So this is a great opportunity to see more of the collection out on display. There's a question about Bushido, which is a very complex topic. I would recommend the exhibition book and also Oleg Benesh's book, Inventing the Way of the Samurai. The question is, was the myth invented from a Western viewpoint? Is there any truth to it? There were instances in medieval texts of the way of archery, but there is nothing that can be found in documents, and this is Professor Benesh's conclusion after years of research. There's nothing called Bushido. There was no codified approach to being a warrior. Bushi is the term that was used during the Edo period from 1600s through to the 1860s for this class of people. They were called the warrior households as well. The bukkei, bu just means military. But in the late 19th century, it is written down as an equivalent to European chivalry by a Japanese Quaker who is living in California. And it's part of this trend for or popularity of medievalism, a global medievalism that begins in perhaps the late 1700s and then grows and grows through the 1800s. And the Japanese are trying to find something equivalent to this tradition of knights and chivalry. And the author Nitobe Inazo writes this book. And the other thing I was going to say was the only rules that are laid down during the Edo period are what Joe mentioned, these laws for the military households. And there's nothing in them about conduct in warfare. This is a time of peace, and that's not the concern anymore. So there are some strands within medieval warfare that you could point to, but there's nothing called Bushido. And I'll take question 4 quickly, which is about the Shogun TV series. Were both TV versions accurate? The conclusion has been that the Disney Plus version, which we have an extract of in the exhibition, is much more historically accurate than the earlier 1980s version. It has a lot more Japanese dialogue to it. There's a lot more focus on the character development of the Japanese characters who are speaking in Japanese, and it's subtitled. The main actor, Saneda Hiroyuki, was a consultant on the series, but I think the ultimate conclusion is it's true to the novel, and the novel is a fictionalized account. A question for Joe, perhaps. Who led the move to change Japanese society in the 1860s?
Well, that's a great question because it's actually the samurai. We talk a lot when we were researching the exhibition about how it's samurai on samurai. And there's they probably didn't think that they were going to end up abolishing themselves, but
Mm.
it wasn't something that was going to be sustainable in this globalist, international uh, sort of ideology that they were entering into. And so there needed to be this change. And as Rosina writes in the book, there was a big development during these 1860s conflicts internally that non-samurai combatants were becoming preferred to samurai warriors for many reasons. And so there was suddenly a destabilization of the hierarchies that existed then. So there were many different things happening, but this abolition came out of a conflict between the samurai classes themselves.
And as we briefly said during the presentation, there are many ranks within samurai society. And there's a good question about that I'll come to just after answering a question about the architect who collected the samurai suit of armor that I showed in section 3. That was William Burgess, who is best known for designing Cardiff Castle. He worked for the Marquis of Bute in particular, and his house still stands. It was in Holland Park, called Tower House. But then there's another interesting question for Joe. What was life like for lower ranking samurai in the Edo period?
Well, it was not great. If you didn't have money, you weren't living um, in a particularly nice way. When Rosina and I went to Japan on a trip in November, and we actually went to visit some of the sites and the types of housing that they would have lived in, and it's very small. And you wouldn't have had as much fun as we imagined. A lot of the samurai exhibitions that have happened before our one are really about the arts of the elite samurai. And so we were trying to highlight these different ranks and the different types of activities that they would have gone to. But they would have enjoyed similar kinds of entertainment. They would have likely gone to kabuki. They would have seen the stories that are being put into print. And eventually, there aren't roles for them. Over time, they lose out on jobs and they become Ronin. They become these masterless samurai and they become a pest on society. They are going about being unproductive members of society.
And I think it's important to talk about economics here because the samurai receive a stipend from the government. All
Yes.
levels receive a stipend in rice. So you receive one bale of rice is supposed to feed you and your household for a year. Um, but and you get more at the top of the samurai ranks, you get less at the bottom of the samurai ranks. But the rice has to be converted to cash. It is a cash economy, and the exchange rate fluctuates. And it's the merchants who are in charge of all of that monetary conversion.
Mm,
And the merchants end up much, much richer than many of the samurai. So there's resentment and social tension because of that. And again, the samurai are seen as parasites. They're living off the efforts of everybody else. They're not working a lot of the time. We have that image of the bored samurai in the barracks because there's only certain days when they have to report for duty and they're kind of kicking around with nothing to do a lot of the time. And down at the lower ranks, the Ashigaru in particular is one of the lowest ranks in the Yoriki. They are sometimes involved in criminal behavior, engaging in criminal behavior, and that's shown in one of the kabuki prints that they can be quite dodgy types because they don't have enough to live on, and you might slip down into the merchant class, and you're trying not to lose your social position. So where it becomes murky, the boundaries between classes is where people want to assert the status the most, perhaps.
mm.
Um, Joe, question for you, perhaps. The arrows are all beautifully made. Are those in the exhibition ceremonial, or would they have been used in battle or hunting?
I don't think any of the ones on display in the exhibition would have been used for battle or hunting. I think they would have been used for either archery practice, so target practice, or they would have been ceremonial.
I think we are going to be wrapping it up there. If you have further questions, I hope that they will be answered by coming to the exhibition itself or reading the book. And it's on until the 4th of May, so there is still time. As we said, some objects will be changed at the beginning of March, so best to get here sooner, but there will still be plenty of beautiful objects to see. Thank you very much all for attending this evening, and we're very grateful for your interest and your support of the museum. Good night.
Thank you.